Barcelona were kicked out of the Champions League quarter-finals this week by PSG. They aren't going to win La Liga, and their manager quit halfway through the season, which is hardly ideal. So today I'm joined by Jon Mackenzie and JJ Bull to discuss the long-term future of Barcelona. Jon, has this been a good or bad season for Barcelona?
Well, I think it's important for us to remember that our answer to that question may be informed by the last 90 minutes of football that Barcelona played. So that was a game of football which was largely determined by a red card. And before that red card, Barcelona looked like they were very comfortably going through. And if that had happened, we would be having a very different conversation now, or at least the narratives would be very different. So I think it's important for us to try and cut through some of that noise and think, what are the objective reasons for what Barcelona's season actually has been like?
Which is what we're going to do today, although we are going to acknowledge that the narrative, JJ, it does have real consequences. People get fired because of these sorts of things. We're going to try and leave it aside for now, though. And with that in mind, good or bad season? What are the key factors?
Well, I think it's important to put it all into context because they're probably going to finish second in La Liga, which is good. They didn't get into the semi-final of the Champions League, which is bad. They were knocked out of both the cups, which is bad. They had big defeats to Real Madrid, which is relevant because they are measured about how they are against Real Madrid. That is relevant. But if you look at the overall, it's not the worst, and they did bring through top-tier La Masia products who could be stars for the future going forward as well. But it is worse than last season. It is worse. You have to look at why that might be. Now, one big reason I think is that during this season, I think only 3 players over the course of the entire season haven't been injured at some point, and they've been really key players, and so that derails a lot of what you want to do. Any consistent tactical ideas, you can't really get them. You have to drop people in. They don't have a huge first-team squad as it is. But the funny thing with it is that despite all those things, and they seem like it's worse, the underlying numbers make it seem like they're actually kind of all right, Jon.
Yeah, there's an argument to be made that not a lot has changed since last season. So on the board here, you can see we've got Barcelona's expected goal difference per 90. What this essentially shows is that across this season, we can see it here, we've got 7 seasons of data. Across this season, you would expect Barcelona to put up an expected goal more than their opponent, which means that you would expect them to win most of their games by a 1-goal margin. Obviously, that's not how it works, but they're in a good position because most of the time you'd expect them to win. But actually, there's a couple of interesting things for us to see here, and one of them is that last season they were pretty much on exactly the same sort of figure. It is a very crude metric, but in terms of what they were doing last season, they were putting up around 1 expected goal difference in every game, and that's the same as what's happening this season. And then if we go back through time, we can see that actually over the last few seasons, a lot of the other managers haven't managed to do that. We go back all the way back to Ernesto Valverde here, and he was around that same level and won the league in the following season as well with slightly less good numbers too. But if we move forward, what essentially has happened since Xavi has arrived is he starts off low, moves high, and has been fairly consistent since. And if we break down those numbers then into attacking and defensive numbers, another few interesting things show up. So this is just the expected goal per 90. And as we can see, this season actually slightly higher than it was last season. So Barcelona creating around the same sort of chance quality that they were last season. One of the things that people pointed to midway through this season, because I think the story of this season has been that Barcelona sort of dipped in the middle, had a bad period and then have gotten better, was that they were underperforming their expected goals. And this was sort of hung out as a reason for why that might be the case. But actually, interestingly enough, they underperformed their expected goals last season as well. So last season, 6.5 under expected goals. So they scored 6.5 less goals than you might have expected them to. Now, obviously, there's still 7 games to go this season. But if we compare those two figures, we can see they're sort of roughly analogous. It's the same sort of figure that they're underperforming their expected goals by again. So it seems as though the reason why people are talking about that is because the season hasn't been perceived to have gone as well, rather than actually there's been any great shift in the numbers. And then defensive numbers, this is the area where I think there's been the biggest drop-off, because you can see the expected goals against per 90 has dropped significantly this season, or risen I should say, because you don't want to have expected goals against. So
up is bad.
Up is bad, so yeah, slightly worse this season. First goal conceded in games, you can see that's gone up as well. They're conceding the first goal in games in 1 in 4 matches rather than 1 in 5, which it was last season.
This is relevant as well, because last season they won the league on the strength of their defensive numbers. They massively overperformed expected goals against. A big reason for that, it's not black and white, but you could say that's probably because Andre ter Stegen is so good as a goalkeeper, so that often happens. But he's been missing for 3 months of the season with an injury. This is where the injuries come into it. So even though the underlying numbers are kind of similar, when you have elite players, they tend to perform better than those expected numbers. So that's where you get the real difference. So if you're missing ter Stegen, that's a huge difference. Peña's a good goalkeeper, but he's not the elite level. and then you start missing individual defenders who weren't there for most of the season. You lack the consistency of your team, but then you lose Xavi for most of the season. Pedri's constantly out, it's your main creator. And then your main goal scorer is out of form for a lot of it as well. So all these things have come together to kind of, even though the numbers look good underneath, that makes a huge difference when you don't have the players you need to make that work.
There was another key player missing this season, wasn't there?
There was a bigger player missing who wasn't injured but has gone. It's like the end of an era at Barcelona. Sergio Busquets left to sail the seas to America, where he's having a lot of fun in Miami with his pals. But in losing Busquets, they've lost an enormous part of what Barcelona was. He's one of the best defensive midfielders of all time, but he does so much for that team. Like the things that Busquets used to do for that team, you might not even notice half of them. People always say if you watch Busquets, you see the game. Is that what they said?
I don't. Did they say that?
Someone said that.
You've looked at me.
So. If you see the game, you don't see X player, but if you see X player, you see the game.
If we watch the game, you don't see Busquets.
Yeah. If you Google quotes about Busquets, you'll find some. You can't work out whether any of them are real or not. But
veracity.
Yeah, that's good. Anyway, him leaving is enormous, and the tactical problems it's even caused, you can see that they've had to try and adapt and put two players into that pivot role to try and make up for what he did in his own. But it's also defensively, the things he blocks off, the way he reads the game. You can't replace Busquets. It's like if you imagine Man City without Rodri, how much worse they are when he's not there. It's the same thing with Barcelona times 3.
Okay, yeah, fine. So then overall, I mean, if we started this by trying to assess, have they had a good or a bad season? I'm confused. What would you say?
Ultimately, it has been a bad season for all the reasons we listed above. But it's way more complicated than they've just been terrible, Joe.
It looked like you were reading that off your computer.
No.
Was that no?
This is my form of acting. It's called computer.
Okay, now John, you don't have a computer, so best of luck with this one. But as we said before, Xavi, the coach, he's already said he's leaving, right? So we know that he won't be there come the end of the season. I'm curious, was he ever any good?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one because I think when Xavi arrived at the club, it felt as though he was going to be the next great manager in that sort of line of tradition that goes from Johan Cruyff to Pep Guardiola and then Xavi. Now,
I think Louis van Gaal would say you're skipping him out, but
Yeah,
let's carry on.
Yeah, and I think what we get from these coaches is the idea that what they are is system managers. And what I mean by that is that these managers are going to come along and they're going to impose a system, a system of tactics that these players can fit into, and that will make them greater than the sum of their parts. So they'll be better because of the system that they have. And that seems to me to be the Barcelona way, and it seemed as though Xavi was going to be the next person to carry on that tradition. I think there's a few interesting things that we've seen from him since he arrived at the club, because on the face of it, he was a systems coach. We saw him implementing structures, fitting the players in, and in that respect, you kind of think, well, he's in that same tradition. So I've got on the board in front of me just the team from last season, and this team I think was probably the best iteration of the system that Xavi wanted to play. And what we have here is we have these three great midfielders, Busquets, De Jong and Pedri. And we've also got Xavi, who is a great central midfielder. You might wonder, why is he out in the wide channel? But obviously what's going to happen here is we're going to have a lot of structural shifting around. What's going to happen actually is De Jong's going to drop in, create space for Xavi to come inside. We've now got this really nice box midfield with really interesting profiles in every position. The channel now is open for Balde to get further forward, and we're doing some of those structural things that we would call positional play that we'd expect from positional play. So we've got 5 players in the channels. We've got width being held by the 2 wide players, Rafinha and then the fullback here. And then you have these sort of nice defensive structures that you can have here with a back 3 and then 2 midfielders. If you want to, Koundé can push forward and you can do a 2-3 system. There's like lots of flexibility, but this is the sort of structure, this is the sort of system that you expect elite coaches to be playing now.
Yeah.
So you look at this and you think, okay, Xavi is within that tradition.
He's in the mould.
Yeah.
Sort of suits the players individually, the profiles, as more than being like the traditional, what you think of as the Barcelona 4-3-3 or 3-4-3, the Cruyffian thing.
Yeah, I think there's some really fun things here. So you've got De Jong, who's just like a ball progression monster. So he can drop out into the fullback area, pick the ball up, carry it forward. You've got Busquets, who's just like, as you were saying before, one of the most perfect pivots we've ever seen in world football. And then a few interesting things. So Xavi, like a good tight space player, but also like really good out of possession. So actually helps you in your counter press if you lose the ball high up, because this is quite an aggressive way of possessing the ball.
Plus the vibes.
Yeah.
It's all about the vibes for me.
Yeah, but I think what happens is that because you have all of the ball progression like tending to happen over on this side of the field, Lewandowski moving across onto this side of the field as well, you do that sort of overload to isolate thing that a lot of positional play coaches do, where you end up with possessing the ball on one side and then you create all of this space around someone like Rafinha or Lamine Yamal, who you can then build up around here, switch the ball across the field and then get them fronted up 1v1 against a fullback as well. And then you have Pedri, who's like the perfect sort of other interior, I think, because he's fairly isolated because everyone's over on this side, but he's brilliant with both feet, so he can come both ways, he can be creative in these sorts of pockets. And I think this system, it worked because the players in it were perfect. But there was a few things I think that were interesting, because I think when we talk about this sort of Guardiola tradition, we spent last week talking about it. It's like, it's all about patience, it's all about risk aversion, it's all about using the positions of your players on the field to move the ball through lines of pressure, to retain possession, to squeeze the opposition back, and often that can be quite slow. And some people think it's a bit boring. But what we actually have seen from Xavi is a very different approach, I think, because rather than having this sort of slow, patient build-up, we've actually seen quite a lot of direct play from him. So in many respects, the system is already starting to feel as though it's not really the same sort of system that Barcelona managers have adopted in the past.
Yeah.
And I think the reason why we said on the last episode why you don't want to play really quickly is because it's much more risky. So you risk turning the ball over and then teams coming back at you. Now, we've already talked about the nice defensive unit that we have here. If you have Busquets, De Jong in this kind of organisation, actually if you lose the ball, then you've got a good chance of making sure that that doesn't turn into a dangerous counter-attack. We've already talked about how Xavi and Pedri as well, good out-of-possession players, so they can counter-press immediately to make it hard for opponents to hurt you. So this whole system works fine, but the problem is that for me, I think that the system actually relied on the players. And so we're starting raising that question of, actually, is this a system at all? If the system doesn't improve the players, actually it's the players who improve the system.
And they get injured and you can't drop into the same system, yeah.
That's what we've seen, right? So players have got injured this season. We've already talked about how Pedri's been out for a long time, Gavi's been out for a long time, Busquets has gone completely and they've struggled to sort of fill someone in that role. And then you've got players like Gundogan, who's going to be, if he's playing in the sort of Xavi role, he's going to be much less intense in the counter press. And then suddenly the system doesn't seem to start working at all. And so for me, this kind of raises the question of, actually, is Xavi in that same school of coaches that we were talking about before, which were system coaches, where the system is designed to make the players greater than the sum of their parts? Now, it's an interesting question, I think, because at the elite level, the assumption doesn't always have to be that you need a coach who makes the team better than the sum of their parts. Because if you're a team like Barcelona, Real Madrid, the sum of the parts for your players is really good. It's good anyway. You don't need to necessarily improve them. And this is obviously one of the big questions in modern tactical theory, is like, should we overcoach elite players or should we undercoach them and let them do their thing? We've just had Jude Bellingham last night, you were telling me, was giving an interview where he was talking about this.
So Bellingham, after beating Man City, said that one of the things he enjoys about Ancelotti is he gives them a bit of freedom, not so much system, so they can move and do the things they want to do, which makes them more off the cuff. It's one of the reasons I quite like watching them.
It feels like a really funny thing to say after just beating Manchester City. Feels like it's like leaving a boot in a little bit.
You think so?
Yeah, because our coach kind of gives us a bit of freedom, and we won the game against the team that doesn't have any freedom. It's just
individuals, right? Because you get more out of them. Like John's just saying there, that the Barca way, if you think about what the way is, it's lots of short passing and positional play and having players in the right position. But the way they beat PSG in the first leg was by drawing them out and pinging the ball over the top when they had space in behind.
Yeah.
And then the second leg, Enrique just changed the shape a bit and went man-to-man at the back, so they had no spare players, and left Araujo on his own, and then he's just trying to ping the ball long, because that's what he always does. So like, maybe Xavi wants to play through the middle, but if you're missing Pedri and Gavi, and you've got Araujo on the ball, it's very hard to play through central areas, so then you have to revert to something longer, which is not really what probably he wants to do, not what Barcelona want them to do.
Yeah, and so the point I'm making is not that one way is right and the other is wrong, but clearly both of those approaches are valid, and that's why the constant debates in Spanish football are, Barcelona have won by having a system and Real Madrid are bad then because they don't have a system, so they should implement a system. But then you have the opposite thing where Real Madrid do well for a season, and then it's like, well, Barcelona are too coached and therefore they need to be able to implement more ideas of freedom. So in order to bring it back to the original question, why it's not worked for Xavi is, well, he seemed like he was a system manager, but actually I think the system only really worked because the players in that system were good enough last season to be able to solve the problems. So this system works because he got 4 great midfielders on the pitch, and they were able to solve build-up problems, not necessarily using the position of the players, but the skills of the players, right? Which is not what the Barcelona tradition is. The tradition should be the system allows you advantages, whereas actually what's happened here is that the players are giving you advantages. So it feels to me very much like Xavi was actually more in the mould of an Ancelotti, or maybe as Zidane at Real Madrid is a better example, because Zidane was still, he cared about structure, maybe not to the same extent that someone like Guardiola does, but he still cared about the structure, but he still was allowing the players to solve those problems rather than allowing the system to solve those problems.
It's almost as if, I'm not saying this is the case with Xavi, because I don't know what his sessions are like or what he actually does, but it's as though he sees what the template of what he wants to do is, but doesn't quite understand why it's the way it is. Like this sounds pretty pretentious, but if you look at a painting, you're like, well, that's a nice painting, but you don't really get what the emotions are behind it and what the artist was drawing of it. Like Guardiola constructed this thing because he fundamentally understands all aspects of it deeply, like the philosophy of it, he gets it, and it relates to like this city and all these sorts of things.
Why do I eat cheese at midnight? You know, do I know why? Or is it just because I do it?
But it's because that's what you do.
I think you
Frog and the Scorpion.
You could say that Xavi understands the system as a player, but maybe he doesn't understand the system as a coach, and that's maybe the difference between it. In the end, it's almost like he's doing a paint by numbers of Guardiola's system. So if I did a paint by numbers of the Mona Lisa, it wouldn't make me Leonardo da Vinci.
It certainly wouldn't, John. No.
Then the thing with that is that you don't know whether that's the thing, you don't know whether he doesn't know what he's doing or whether it's because he's had so much to deal with the players, all the stuff outside the pitch as well, and the injuries. Like, it's hard to work out exactly what he would really have wanted to do, ideally, with that team.
Well, whoever comes in to replace Xavi is very likely going to want to spend money in the transfer market. But of course, we know that Barcelona are in a perilous financial situation. So we asked the Athletic's Paul Ballus if he could tell us specifically what impact that situation is going to have on their ability to spend money this summer. Here's Paul.
Hi, this is Pablo Llull, and I'm here to talk about Barcelona transfer business next summer, which, as you might suspect, this is going to be an eventful one. Once again, because Barcelona right now cannot operate as a normal club, and the reason for that is because they are spending more money in salaries than what La Liga allows them to. And this is what they need to change. First of all, here Barcelona are going to be waiting for the players who near the end of their contract, and I'm talking about Marcos Alonso here, who is expected to leave, and Sergio Roberto, who might end up staying. Secondly, and that's possibly one of the most important points, they need to meet all the conditions that they submitted to La Liga on their financial plan last summer. They need to show La Liga that they can follow it and that they are all back on track to return to a sustainable financial situation. And third point, they basically need to bring money in. And the easiest way to bring money in possibly is to assume big sales inside the club. Of course, it's difficult to know who will they sell, but it's fair to say that possibly, except the latest academy graduates, and I'm talking about Lamine Yamal and Pau Cubarsí here, and potentially Xavi. But if we talk about names that can be expected to be in that conversation, I think that the top of the list should be Ronald Araujo, basically because the centre-back is in talks over a new contract, but there's doubts if Barcelona can really offer this new contract, and if they would prefer to cash in on a big sale. Then there are other names such as Jules Koundé or Rafinha or Andreas Christensen, which, if there's a good offer, Barcelona would probably be willing to sell, but there's doubts that the players really want to leave. So that's a bit the situation here. Let's see how it goes. Huge summer ahead in Barcelona.
Well then, JJ, I assume based on hearing that it's absolutely ideal that Barcelona just have 1 million incredible children who sprout out of La Masia every year.
It's pretty helpful, yeah. So you may remember that they were quite good for a long time with players like Iniesta and Xavi and Puyol and all the rest who came through La Masia. And now what you've got is a core of players coming through who are amazing. So part of the benefit of having that system is that you bring players through who understand the system inside out, which makes them really, really great when they play for Barcelona. When you put them elsewhere, sometimes they're not as good. Apart from Messi, who's obviously amazing. But what you've got here are players like Cubarsí, who is top level. Pedri's one of the best. You know, I love Pedri. He's one of the best.
You do never stop talking about Pedri.
That's right. Gavi, God, he's good. Vitor Roque, they signed for a bit of money as well. He's a Brazilian. I think he's played internationally, but he's going to be top level as well. Lamine Yamal, 16. These are all players who have played this season for Barcelona in La Liga who are under 21. And Yamal's 16, for example. It's pretty nuts. Hector Fort is a right back who can play that left back as well. But this group of players could be very, very special. And Marc Guiu came off the bench and scored, I think, the winner in a game for Barcelona as well. The point being that, like, they've got quite a small first team, and so when they have injuries, you need to drop in someone from the B team or the 19s or something, and then when they drop in, because they know the system, they turn out to be pretty good, but they are all special players. Now, if they can build the core, like if they have Ter Stegen's one of the best goalkeepers in the world, they might need to replace him at some point, then you need another centre-back, then someone in the pivot role. They're not going to be, you can't use any of the players they've got there. Nico Gonzalez has gone to Porto, I think, so they haven't got all the players they need here, but this is a core that could turn out to be a really good Barcelona team, and because you can't then supplement them with transfers because they don't have any money, this is what they'll be relying on, and it could be, if they're coached the right way, it could go on to be a great team. But you need experience with that team to try and take them to the next level, which is why it's useful. They've still got Lewandowski and Gundogan to get them there.
Yeah. I wonder how long it will be until one of Sergio Busquets' children is able to play in the 6th role. Maybe that will solve all of Barcelona's
that's probably
problems.
not far off, actually. What is he, 34, 35?
Yeah, I think he might be older than that.
I think he's 35.
Is he?
Yeah.
Should we spend ages debating how old he is?
I think I'll just tell you, because
Okay.
I have this thing called the internet. He's 35!
Oh, he's 35, okay. I mean, the funny thing about this, I find, is, and we talked about this a little bit last week, while there are plenty of teams around the world who, produce some of the great young players, there are a couple who do that and then just seemingly coincidentally bail themselves out of really awful situations. Barcelona, I feel like, are one of those teams right now. Manchester United are the team that we mentioned last week for doing this. It almost feels unfair, John.
Yeah, I guess when you get a certain status in world football, your life becomes a lot easier in terms of youth development, because you can just sort of, your catchment area is massive, it's global, and you can get the teams further down the pyramid doing all of the development for you, and then when they hit a certain age and you're not only more likely to know that they're going to be good than when they're 9 years old and starting out in the academy, you can then say, why don't you come and join us, and you can be a Premier League side. And I think
That's kind of what Man City done really well, because they've got so many young players coming through now, because they put the part of the infrastructure they put in when they came in was making sure they could bring through these great players.
And they built the Bond villain base.
Yeah, exactly.
house
They
them.
are made in like a science lab. There's like electricity coming from the roof into green. What do you call them? A vat, I guess.
A VAT, yeah.
there is an interesting financial element to this as well, though, because we've seen Man City use those young players as a way of like being able to generate money as well. So the sale of Cole Palmer, for example.
It's for the team as much as it is the business.
Yeah,
for sure,
right.
Yeah. Like Benfica, they produce so many great players, but a lot of that they have to sell on because
Yeah,
they
sure.
can't. The players they can attract in, they can play at that level, and then they sell them on for more.
But I think this represents like a big problem now for Barcelona in terms of like what is their business plan going to be, which is maybe a miserable way of thinking about it. But I suppose the options here are you could sell these players off to make money, which, as we've said, Barcelona have these financial issues. Or do you stick with them and try and build them into a core of players who can actually compete at the highest level and then generate revenue in that way? And I think a lot of what the conversation a couple of summers ago was about Barcelona almost like front-loading their investments, actually taking money from the future to invest now in order to be a good team. That hasn't worked out. Is the approach going to be that they carry on down that path, but rather than having, sold future of the club, actually by having the future of the club coming through La Masia and then being able to say, well, we are going to be able to compete because in 3 or 4 years' time, we're actually going to have one of the best teams in the world. So do they keep these players and then sell other players? How do they bring in experience around these players in order to be actually able to use this for their own advantage?
Yeah, because then the players coming through are amazing, but you don't know they're going to form the team, and you also don't know what the level's going to be when they're 23, 24.
Well, that was my question.
Like,
can you look at that and say this is going to be the next great team?
I mean, you can look at individuals. I mean, Gavi's clearly brilliant. Pedri is one of the best young players in the world, but huge injury problems because I think probably because he got overplayed for that one season. He played about 73 games, something like that, which is obviously a lot. Yamal is 16 going on 17 and has played an awful lot of minutes. I think he's got like 30 games he's played in La Liga this season. That's a lot for a 16-year-old. And the problem is that you might get, like, if you can form a team that's going to be great. Cubarsí, I'm talking about these players again, but like Cubarsí, Pedri, Yamal are incredible players who could be there for years and years and years and years. But you still need other players in there. You need to refresh it. Like, you need a new team every 3-4 years. That Barcelona team was amazing with Xavi, Messi. I mean, they had Messi, the best player ever. Then you've got Xavi, Iniesta, and Busquets, who are 3 of the best midfielders of all time. And that's the benefit you've got. Pedri is he one of the best players of all time? You don't know, because you need Busquets there, and then you need the other players around them. Like, it's very rare that will happen. Before that Guardiola team that made them all massive, they'd only won the European Cup once when Johan Cruyff was there in the dream team and Ronald Koeman scored the lovely free kick. And so that team made them what they are now, but you wonder whether they might end up turning into more of a Benfica where they have to bring through players and then sell them on at a profit to try and get back to where they are and resolve all their financial problems, because they have bet on the now and they've only really got Real Madrid to compete with and they're just falling short and they can't keep doing that.
The other worry, I think, is like physical. Like these players, as you said, the Yamal's played 30 games of football in a season at 16. It's going to have an impact on his long-term fitness. We've already seen Gavi and Pedri have issues with their fitness, having been played so much, so young. So again, that's, I suppose, another thing that Barcelona will have to be hyper aware of, because if they are going to rely on youth players, yes, it's good because it allows them to get minutes where they might not usually get them if the team was more successful. But at the same time, you have the opposite problem, which is you just burn these players out, and then their careers are over midway through their 20s.
Xavi and Iniesta weren't really first team till I think they were about 21-ish. So even that small difference, it can have a long-term effect.
I also have a long-term fitness problem. Well, I mean, what are they going to be in the future then? What does their long-term future look like, John, do you think?
I think they're still on a knife edge, really. I think it's easy for us to look at the short-term like positives, but I think there's so much riding on the fact that, as we've already said, they've sort of sold their future, and everything has to go right for the next couple of decades, really, for them to get it right. So I think there's lots of positives here, like as we've said, really exciting youth team, but you've still got to make that team work for long enough for it to work financially for you. So I think I'm still sort of on the fence that that things are going in the right direction. Things are great now, but in the future it could be very different.
Well, there we go. John's on the fence.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Amy Lawrence and Rafa Honigstein. With the latest transfer news and insight on every Premier League story that matters, theathletic.com puts you inside football, and you can try it free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.